Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Thursday, November 28th, 2024. Time for, well, a Thanksgiving show. It's Thanksgiving. It's actual Thanksgiving Day today, not the day before where everybody's taking off, not the day after when everybody's taking off, but the day of. And, well, today is the day in which I guess we'll make the most excuses for the noise in the background. There's nothing we can do, and there's nothing we should do because, hey, it's Thanksgiving, and we're the real intruders in this situation. So we carry on with the diner ambiance. We'll talk to some dead turkeys about why they still support Trump and get all of it on record and keep you company as you putter around your kitchen or watch the parade or make preparations to flee the country or whatever you might be doing today. And we'll putter around together and keep one another company. Too many desserts being made. We're going to be overwhelmed today. But I'm going to eat some turkey in the meantime as well. And warn you about perhaps the upcoming collapse of international society. I'm not really sure. You know, you can't tell what's going to happen. Happened to see something this morning that's getting a great deal of traction on Blue Sky because Adam Serwer said it, and he's got a lot of followers, and he says good things. So people are interested in it. It's just something to ponder, I think. Seems to have gotten off to a good start, but he hasn't expanded on it greatly just yet. But he says this morning, I am convinced that the best way to understand how the Trump administration is going to work is to look at the invasion of Iraq, which takes it's a little bit of a thinker of a line here. He did expand on it a little bit a few minutes later, saying ideological messianic, not messianic, but messianism. I don't know how you pronounce that word now that I think about it. I've only done messianic, but anyway, ideological messianism, maybe we'll say, prizing loyalty over competence. I mean, all of those things ring a certain bell. A dedication to outsourcing government functions to enrich political allies. That seems fairly clear. A conviction that propaganda can overcome the bleakest realities. Just lie about it, say what you want to do. Say what reality you think is happening. And remember that the quote about creating their own reality is not a new one, and it's not about Trumpism. It's about Republicanism in general, and it's from what? Karl Rove, way back when. What was it? The conviction that propaganda can overcome the bleakest realities, blithe dismissal of empiricism of any kind. You know, that does sound kind of familiar, doesn't it? And I wouldn't necessarily have compared the two without his bringing it up, but I guess it does make some sense. What is really weird, though, is how much the Cheneys loved the first example of ideological messianism, prizing loyalty over competence, dedication to outsourcing government functions to enrich political allies, and I guess that was the one that really did it for them. A conviction that propaganda can overcome the bleakest realities, blithe dismissal of empiricism of any kind, stovepiping of intelligence, et cetera, right? That clearly rang the Cheneys' bells last time, but this one they hate. And can it really just be explained by, well, this time they won't be able to outsource government functions to enrich political allies or themselves? I don't know. It's a very interesting question. What is it that bothers you so much about it this time as opposed to last time? There obviously are going to be some differences, and someone can differentiate and you can distinguish between the cases, and Cheney's probably could do so articulately. I'd just like to see him do it. I might even agree. But then I wondered about, the poor reaction in some quarters of the Cheneys endorsing Kamala Harris, and in the case of Liz Cheney, campaigning with her, etc. I mean, I know people made that association and didn't like it very much, but I mean, it was easy enough to put it aside and say, hey, we don't have to adopt Cheneyism as a form of governance should Kamala Harris win the presidency. We just say, all right, we'll use this as a tool to gain the presidency. Well, we didn't, for one thing. But yeah, I mean, maybe we understood innately what Adam has come to realize here now. Of course, it had other meanings for me, like the idea that, well, hey, if only somebody had, say, warned the Democratic president who served in between George W. Bush and Donald Trump and emphasized to them the necessity for holding people accountable legally, and yes, putting some of the people from the previous administration on trial and actually saying there was something legally wrong with what happened here and somebody needs to pay the price for it. And it might not be enough to stop it, but it's the only hope we have of preventing the very next Republican president, whoever that may be. Let's say we were imagining it in 2009 or so. Whoever the very next Republican president is, unless we put a stop to it and put a stake in the ground, they're just going to pick up exactly where W left off and do the same and worse. I don't think we had any real clear idea of who that person would be and how much worse they would make it, but it was pretty clear that that was what was destined to happen. And in fact, that is what happened. And in fact, there was no accountability for the prior administration. And as a result, well, I guess here we are. Of course, we could have probably told the president who served in between Trump and Trump again, and we may have gotten further. I mean, there was some attempt to hold people to legal account. There is that. But I think even in 2009, we knew that such things would take a very, very long time. And there was some possibility of blowing right past it and mooting the whole case if you didn't get it done quickly. Anyway, here we are. Maybe a very apt comparison, something to think about over the weekend and ruin it for yourselves. Okay, so I have a large collection of articles. And it being Thanksgiving, Scott's got the day to himself with his family, and so I can't decide whether to simply whether this is going to be one of those days where there's so many links that the best I can do is just give you a list of them, or so few links that the best I can do is give you a list of them. But I've put aside a number of stories, some of which were hinted at yesterday, and some of which are brand new to the pile. And I guess we ought to get to it. Let's see. Is it best to go in reverse chronological order? No one knows for sure. All right, let's see what we have here. Something to continue yesterday's discussion, and maybe what we ought to be doing is heading back to that story about Cynthia Lummis and why she's the Senate's queen of crypto, as Roll Call was calling her. We only got about half, maybe, way through the article. But you may remember, we got into this. We actually got into this by wondering about why Kelly Loeffler had been considered for Secretary of Agriculture, but then was passed over, and that there might be some sort of weird deal in the making there. I don't know why agriculture would have been the place to land for her. It didn't work out. Maybe nobody saw the benefit of this thing after all, but the speculation was that Kelly Loeffler's very wealthy husband, and she wealthy in her own right there too, still is involved as CEO of a company that had bought and managed a cryptocurrency exchange or something along those lines. A very, a big investor in cryptocurrency. And that the Trump media organization that owns Truth Social and God knows what else wanted to buy this crypto exchange, or perhaps the holding company that owned the crypto exchange backed. And perhaps the idea was, well, if we reward your wife with power within the administration, then perhaps you'll give us a good purchase price on this thing, because, of course, the company we propose to use to buy your cryptocurrency exchange is a shell with no assets and no inherent value. So we could use a price break. Anyway, that didn't happen, although we did not, I don't think, note, we may have noted just in passing that Loeffler has a position in the Trump structure. She is, was it not transition, not at the head of the transition, but at the head of the inaugural effort. And something I meant to say the other day, as other reporters have discovered the potential for corruption in the transition. Rachel Maddow did a piece the other day that I saw a clip of online, pointing out that in the transition, it's like a Citizens United gone wild. There's no reporting requirements. Pretty much anybody can donate to a fund to pay for transition activities, foreign donors, corporate donors. No real limitations and no real reporting requirements about who's giving the money to fund the transition. Similarly, you may remember from, 8 years ago, that there are no disbursement reporting requirements for the inauguration. You got to report who's giving money and who's putting money on the on the incoming side, but on the outgoing side, who gets to keep the money? There's no reporting requirements. So you have a really interesting complementary corruption enabling situation here. How much, it doesn't matter, and you don't have to tell anybody about who and how much money goes in through the transition, and then you don't have to tell anybody about how much money goes out and to where in inauguration. And there's no, as far as I know, I don't know about any restrictions about transferring funds between those funds. That is, to transfer the dollars in the bank accounts as between stuff that gets, quote unquote, donated for transition and then used in whatever fashion for inauguration. Anyway, Loeffler has a finger in that pot that way, as one of the top officials overseeing the inauguration celebrations. So there's that. And then we learned about the effort by large crypto moguls to just simply force the government to help them cash out. Very interesting piece we read yesterday, that the effort was on to authorize and then make the federal government buy 1 million bitcoins. And why Bitcoin versus any other cryptocurrency? Well, because a lot of people who hold lots and lots of cryptocurrency and are wealthy on paper because of it own it in Bitcoin. And the whole thing essentially depends on finding other suckers to buy Bitcoins off of you at rising prices so that you can make your money. Because the Bitcoin itself doesn't do anything or produce anything, right? There's no reason why it should go up this much in inherent value, but for the fact that you can find lots of suckers who say, I heard you could get rich instantly on it, let me buy one of these things no matter what the cost. Anyway, their idea there is make the government buy 1 million bitcoins. I have 1 million bitcoins. Let me sell them to you. You take the billions of dollars of cash out of the government and give it to me. And that was a way to turn the fake money into real money and get away with it. And anyway, so as it turns out, one of the other holders, not nearly of as much cryptocurrency, but of enough, and certainly, I guess, the holder of perhaps the most cryptocurrency in Congress is Cynthia Lummis. And what do you know if she's not the sponsor of these kinds of bills? Though we did learn that she came to become crypto queen of Congress through humble beginnings. She, her daughter had a boyfriend who was totally into cryptocurrency in 2013 and convinced her that it was awesome, and or you could get rich quick. And she bought a whopping $1,000 worth of cryptocurrency way back when. And now it's worth $128,000, which is terrific for her. It doesn't exactly make her, a major player in the cryptocurrency world, but, would be enough to convince somebody like Cynthia Lummis that this is an awesome opportunity and everybody ought to have it, even though really the whole thing depends on not everybody having it and her having some, but not other people having any, and then them wanting it and her being able to sell it to them and then walk away while they realize they've bought an empty bag. And now her goal is to use the full bag that the government has, empty it out and give it to other people, and leave the government with that empty bag. So, let's see. We left off having read about her initiation into Bitcoin world, and that she said she ended up speaking to this conference, which turned out to be a historically, in Bitcoin world, a very important conference where, I don't know, a lot of people who held a lot of Bitcoin got together and decided some important things about one another. And we were then reading that she now, of course, has a seat on the Senate Banking Committee, from which Lummis is leading the legislative push to build a regulatory framework that will support crypto markets, which some U.S. financial regulators have described as 95% fraud, hype, noise, and confusion, and the Wild West. And that the plan has critics who say it's self-serving. There's one comment here. It's definitely a conflict of interest, according to Dylan Hetler-Gaudet, Government Affairs Manager at the Project on Government Oversight. In this particular case, she has become the leading evangelist for crypto, so it makes it look even worse. She has the zeal of the newly converted here. Again, we're reading from Roll Call. This is actually a 2022 article, as I recall. And things have only gotten worse since then, I guess. Lummis says her bill would tame that lawlessness by providing regulatory clarity and allowing legit crypto projects to flourish under a supervisory framework akin to those that currently oversee securities and commodities. That would do wonders for the price of Bitcoin, says Antoinette Shore, professor of finance at MIT. Shore had recently co-authored a paper arguing that Bitcoin's sky-high prices are mostly the product of investors betting that regulators worldwide will allow Bitcoin to be a financial instrument that regular people are allowed to invest in. And I think we left off there before heading into the next section, or rather than heading into the next section, on toward regulation. Scammers, it begins, have flocked to the blockchain, executing classic pump and dump schemes, which the jargon-loving crypto community calls rug pulls. The FTC received nearly 7,000 reports of crypto scams worth $80 million between October 2020 and March 2021, a 12-fold increase over the same period a year earlier. And if you followed it even from a great distance like me, you might remember the situation with Dogecoin, perhaps fitting that description. And Elon Musk, I guess, having bought a considerable amount of it and then chatting it up online, and his fans, this was before he owned Twitter, though, his fans getting excited about being given what they thought was an insider tip, essentially, and all ran out and bought this Dogecoin, and it inflated dramatically. Elon Musk presumably sold his shares in it while it was at its high, and the rest of the people who bought them thinking they were going to follow Elon Musk to untold wealth found that they had a worthless coin, and it was called Dogecoin, D-O-G-E, and hilariously he pretends, or he says that the pretend department he proposes and purports to lead for the Trump administration, Department of Government Efficiency, will be the Doge, haha. How hilarious is that? I'm stealing from you again, and I'm telling you that I'm doing it to you right to your face, and you're still letting me do it. So where were we? Right. Lots of scams. FTC received nearly 7,000 reports of crypto scams worth $80 million between October 2020 and March 2021, which is not a long period of time. 12-fold increase over the same period a year earlier. Drug dealers, hackers, tax evaders, and other shady characters have also increasingly hidden their illicit activities in plain sight. Transactions on blockchains like Bitcoin are public. Anyone can see them, but the sending and receiving accounts are anonymous. While law enforcement can sometimes still track down recipients, the FBI, for instance, recovered about $2.3 million of the $4.3 million in Bitcoin that Colonial Pipeline paid to ransomware hackers last summer. That would have been last summer as of 2022, so way back when. Still, many illicit transactions fly completely under the radar, and according to the DEA's 2020 National Drug Threat Assessment, cartels seem to be running more of their money laundering operations in crypto. Lummis bristles at the suggestion that Bitcoin's main value comes from illicit activities. But it's an association that's tough to escape, and she knows. Lummis traveled to Miami last summer for the 2021 Bitcoin conference, speaking on a panel about Congress with Ohio Republican Representative Warren Davidson, a fellow crypto enthusiast. Miami Mayor Francis X. Suarez gave the opening speech at the two-day $1,500 ticket conference. But the highlight was none other than Ross Ulbricht, the founder of Silk Road, a flea market for illegal drugs and other contraband on the dark web. Ulbricht, perhaps better known by his online alias as the Dread Pirate Roberts, remember him, was sentenced to life in prison for his role facilitating drug deals online using Bitcoin. He was also indicted for soliciting a hitman to kill an associate, but prosecutors dropped that charge. Don't worry about that one. The conference organizers played a recording of a lengthy phone call that he made extolling Bitcoin's virtues. When asked about how it would look to share a billing with a convicted criminal, Lummis avoided the question, arguing instead that Bitcoin is no worse than plain old cash. It's easier to hide a crime committed in U.S. dollars than it is to hide a crime committed in Bitcoin, she said. Nonetheless, some of the greatest crimes committed of late apparently committed in Bitcoin for some strange reason. Even if you look past the con men and hackers, crypto faces large regulatory challenges. Much of the money being invested into crypto is flowing to upstarts promising to disrupt Wall Street using blockchain technology, falling under the purview of a disjointed state and federal regulatory regime that's hard enough to navigate without the additional complications. This year's, and that was 2022's Super Bowl broadcast, so packed with commercials touting exchanges like Coinbase and FTX, and we know what happened to that one, that some took to calling it the Crypto Bowl, may have made it seem like crypto has decisively hit the mainstream. But cryptocurrencies can be chimeric, how do they pronounce that? Chimeric assets, causing jurisdictional headaches for regulators and developers alike. A token first sold to fund the development of a new product can look an awful lot like a stock or bond regulated by the Securities and Exchange Commission, but it could then start being used more like money, or at least store credit. Others resemble commodities overseen by the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. While the nascent crypto lobby has been trying to educate an often skeptical Congress for a few years now, its first legislative crisis came last summer when the Senate added tax reporting requirements for crypto firms shortly before passing a bipartisan infrastructure bill. Lummis opposed the requirement and penned an amendment that won some, but not enough, bipartisan support. Still, the industry praised her hustle. Cynthia Lummis was just incredible in this whole thing, said Michelle Bond, CEO of the Association of Digital Asset Markets. Infrastructure showed what a shining star Senator Lummis is. Bond also pointed to Lummis's legislative aide, Chris Land, who, as a staffer in the state legislature, helped write Wyoming's industry-heralded cryptocurrency statute. After the sponsor of that bill, Tyler Lindholm, lost a primary challenge in 2020, Lummis hired him to be her state policy director. Now we get that in the Senate, Bond said. How lucky are we? Oh, dear. Wyoming's laws are so good for crypto, the fellow lawmaker and convert Davidson said. He worries, perhaps half-jokingly, that Lummis might not want to fully level the playing field with her bill. Wyoming is ahead of every other state, said the Ohio Republican, who is arguably crypto's biggest fan in the House. I think she's got an interest in trying to protect Wyoming's advantages, which would, of course, become her advantages. Isn't that interesting? Ann Alexander, professor at the University of Wyoming, said about 50 crypto firms have relocated to the state to take advantage of the crypto laws there. But many of those companies have just incorporated there, not moved their operations or located their headquarters there, she said. Working with lawmakers in both parties, Lummis has written a draft bill that her office touts as the first comprehensive broad piece of legislation relating to digital assets of the same caliber as Graham, Leach, Bliley, and Regal. Was it Regal? Neal? Or Regal? Regal, right? I think so. All right. Well, you know what? All right. We're coming up on our first break here. And I don't know, this is a slower moving story than I thought here, but one of those laws, the Graham-Leach-Bliley Act that she refers to, deregulated large swaths of the financial sector to contested effect. Supporters credited it for unleashing an economic boom, while critics blamed it for a subsequent bust in 2008. Everyone remembers that one, don't they? According to Lummis's office, the draft bill they hope to introduce this spring gives clear guidance to regulators about which assets belong to different asset classes, protects consumers, sure, through strong standards and mechanisms for policing bad actors, regulates stable coins, and creates a new digital asset self-regulatory organization under the joint jurisdiction of the CFTC and SEC to oversee the digital asset markets. I bet they really won't.
Hi everybody, it's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time, just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. So you're getting the idea here, and it occurs to me that this is perhaps more time than we need to spend convincing you that Cynthia Lummis is somebody to watch in all of this cryptocurrency dealing. If you like, and the subject is of interest to you, I encourage you to read the rest of the article there. I'll provide it as a link. There was another piece here that I also probably shouldn't spend the whole day on. But David Dayen also writing back in March of 2022 about Cynthia Lummis under an otherwise, well, I would otherwise probably ignore it, but the headline makes it of some interest. The real reason Republicans are blocking Biden's Fed nominees. And it's the subheader that grabbed me here. It has to do with Senator Cynthia Lummis and special Wyoming chartered depository institutions that take cryptocurrencies. Aha. This approaches this whole thing from a slightly different angle. At his State of the Union address, President Biden, back in 2022, urged Congress to confirm his 5 nominees for the Federal Reserve Board of Governors. In their absence, a more hawkish Federal Open Market Committee dominated by regional Fed bank presidents, could push the lever on interest rates uncomfortably quickly and cause real economic pain in the name of fighting inflation. And of course, with the election then rapidly approaching, you could see why that would have been of some concern. Currently, again back in 2022, those Fed nominees are stuck behind a Republican blockade with a GOP boycott of the Senate Banking Committee markup, making it impossible for the nominees to get a floor vote. The reason for the delay? Conservative opposition to Sarah Bloom Raskin, tapped to be the Fed vice chair for supervision. Raskin has been confirmed by the Senate twice before with unanimous support, but her willingness to be a strong bank regulator and prevent financial institutions from taking on undue risks with fossil fuel-heavy assets has big business worried. They've activated their Republican allies. GOP Banking Committee members have also latched on to a story about how Raskin, while serving on the board of a Colorado-chartered financial fintech firm called Reserve Trust, personally lobbied the Kansas City Fed for a master account, which would give it access to the central bank payment system. Reserve Trust did get its master account in 2018. I don't know much about the master accounts. They play heavily in this story, though. Reserve Trust's founder has called the allegations against Raskin completely false, though, saying that the master account was granted only after the company changed its business model. The Kansas City Fed, which granted the account, backed this up, though the Colorado Division of Banking has disputed this. But the explanations haven't been sufficient for the committee's top Republican, Senator Pat Toomey, or Senator Cynthia Lummis, who repeatedly hammered Raskin over the master accounts in a banking committee hearing. However, Lummis has an ulterior motive for raising the master account issue, one that she hasn't been particularly shy about stating. For months, Lummis has been publicly lobbying for two crypto companies in Wyoming to get their own master accounts. Specifically, these firms are state-chartered non-banks intended to allow their customers to convert crypto assets into cash, but they need a master account in order to do that. Effectively, these firms would become very similar to a bank with full access to the Fed's payment system, but without having to submit to federal regulation or even FDIC deposit insurance. That doesn't sound great, does it? Experts have warned of potentially grave consequences for financial stability and consumer protection. Lummis, critics argue, is pressuring the Fed to make that happen and using the Raskin Reserve Trust situation as leverage. Lummis's bid to get into the crypto banking system is totally underappreciated, said Lee Reiners, a lecturing fellow at Duke University, where he works with Raskin, a professor at Duke, and executive director of its Global Finance Markets Center, who has written about the issue. This is like the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, the OCC, allowing derivatives in the 1990s. That's a momentous decision. At Raskin's Senate hearing, Lummis's primary complaint was not just that she allegedly intervened to get Reserve Trust a master account, but that the entities in Wyoming weren't given the same treatment. My state's companies, my constituents, have been stonewalled, have been slow-walked, and have not been able to get approval, she said. Indeed, Lummis asked Fed Chair Jerome Powell and Governor Lael Brainerd, who both of whom have been renominated for positions to the Board of Governors, about master accounts at their confirmation hearings. She published an op-ed in November of 2021 in the Wall Street Journal saying that Powell and Brainerd would be unworthy to serve if they did not give Wyoming crypto institutions payment system access. The lobbying is strangely reminiscent of what Lummis is accusing Raskin of, calling in favors and even threatening consequences unless master accounts go to her preferred allies. You're beginning to see what's shaping up here. I'm going to jump out of this article, too, because it is also complicated, long, highly technical, etc. But I wanted to use it as an opportunity to sort of put on your radar Cynthia Lummis and the crypto weirdos, given what we learned the other day about their plans of possibly leveraging, I would say, Barron Trump's extraordinary interest in crypto. And I'm sure Donald Trump Jr., he's got to be a crypto bro himself, and converting Dad into one as well. even though he seemed to have gotten it right early on, believe it or not, by labeling crypto as a scam. But now it'll be a scam that he can use to empty Fort Knox to his own great benefit. All right. So moving on to a couple of other things, revisiting the tariff issue, the play that so many of us thought might in fact be in the offing appears to have happened. I'm sure it's been written up by now, but I don't think I have a prepared article on it. But I do have the Blue Sky post of Stephen Chase here, a Globe and Mail reporter in the Ottawa Bureau, who has grabbed, done that unpopular thing on Blue Sky, grabbing a screenshot of Donald Trump on Truth Social and then moving it over to Blue Sky to let everybody know what's happening, even though they all went to Blue Sky to get away from Donald Trump. But it's useful news. Trump posts on Truth Social last night, just had a wonderful conversation with the new president of Mexico, Claudia Sheinbaum Pardo. She's new compared to when he was president. It was someone else, but anyway, she's not that new, but new to him. Anyway, he goes on to say, she has agreed to stop migration through Mexico and into the United States, effectively closing our southern border. We also talked about what can be done to stop the massive drug inflow into the United States and also U.S. consumption of these drugs. It was a very productive conversation. And so I guess the idea here is what we figured was in the offing yesterday, right? Make these threats about tariffs and say that they're connected to stopping migration and drugs. And then at some point, either you simply say, I'm so strongly strong that I stopped all the migration and the drugs, or in this case, right, you have a call with the president of Mexico. He says, well, I'm not going to lift these tariffs until you stop migration. And she just says, I know how he works. Okay, I'll stop migration. Oh, okay. Well, all right, good then. He doesn't go so far as to say he's lifting the tariffs just yet. But later on, if he just never implements them because too many people tell him it will be a disaster, he'll say, that's okay. I don't actually need to put the tariffs in place. I was so strongly strong in threatening them that Mexico gave us exactly what we wanted, and they're paying for it, and therefore we don't need the tariffs. So I guess that play is already rolling, and you should be aware of it. I'm sure it's been written up in more detail somewhere by now, but I don't have it immediately at hand, but maybe we'll search around during one of the breaks and see what people are up to in writing about it. There also was an interesting piece on the Trump administration and transition's interest in bypassing the whole background check thing. I have some more articles about it that I don't think we actually ever read through, but we definitely touched on the subject and why they, of course, they have lots of people they want to appoint to jobs that would never clear a real background check. So you may recall that they had proposed things like, well, I'm going to take the FBI out of the game anyway, and we're just going to use private background checks. And then somebody came up with the interesting idea of, well, we did the background checks during the transition, which is not something that we can use the FBI for until, during the transition, he has to be president to order the FBI to do those background checks. And because we want to hit the ground running, we need the background checks done before January 20th, so we're doing it privately, which is, of course, another way of saying we're just paying people to rubber stamp our guys. Well, here's an interesting idea, I thought. I think I saw it first mentioned in a story over at Daily Kos. There was a link here, though, to an MSNBC opinion column by Frank Figliuzzi, an MSNBC columnist, is all it says here. I don't think I'm familiar with his name, but the proposal here, Biden should order background checks of Trump's cabinet picks. Like, do it now. Almost as a quote-unquote favor to the incoming administration. The FBI has conducted background investigations of White House nominees since at least the tenure of President Dwight Eisenhower's time in office. But hey, something's getting in the way of it this time around. Maybe he can fix it. We had fair warning. Figliuzzi begins. Last month, the New York Times reported that then-candidate Donald Trump's advisors were telling him to skip FBI background investigations for his high-level selections for nominees. Last week, CNN, citing, quote, people close to the transition planning, unquote, reported that Trump doesn't plan to submit the names of at least some of his cabinet-level picks for FBI vetting. Whether you're a Republican, Democrat, or Independent, and regardless of whether you're energized or enraged by Trump's controversial picks, you should be concerned about the possibility of a vetting process that's really no process at all. The FBI has conducted background investigations of White House nominees since at least the tenure of Eisenhower, right? Even so, there's no law clearly mandating presidents or presidents-elect to submit their nominees and appointments to the FBI for investigation. And, of course, there's also tricks you can play, like, we're going to do a background check on Brett Kavanaugh. Everybody give all your tips to this empty mailbox here, and then we'll just leave things there and say, yeah, he's fine. We haven't heard anything. But anyway, back to the article. In 1953, Eisenhower issued Executive Order 10450, calling for investigations of prospective federal employees. Yet executive orders don't have the full effect of law, and they're only binding on the executive branch. Worse, Eisenhower's executive order is subject to interpretation. Consider, if you will, you should, Section 2, the head of each department and agency of the government shall be responsible for establishing and maintaining within his department or agency an effective program to ensure that the employment and retention of employment of any civilian officer or employee within the department or agency is clearly consistent with the interests of national security. There's a lot of wiggle room there. Section 3 of the executive order reads, the appointment of each civilian officer or employee in any department or agency of the government shall be made subject to investigation, but in no event shall the investigation include less than a national agency check, including a check of the fingerprint files of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. And that means Trump, who claims he's using private firms to conduct background inquiries, might get by with having whatever firm that is simply checking FBI fingerprint files. Yet, despite there being no mandate, the intent here was for government inquiry involving the FBI. Subsequent presidents, including Bill Clinton and Barack Obama, revised Eisenhower's edict to mitigate intrusive inquiries into sexual orientation in the granting of security clearances, but still missing is a specific mandate for FBI investigation of White House nominees. And again, an executive order isn't quite law. Clearly, the intent in these executive orders has always been for a government agency, particularly the FBI, to conduct these inquiries, but we have an incoming president who thumbs his nose at rules and intentions. The Presidential Transition Act of 1963 directs the FBI to conduct such background checks expeditiously for individuals that the president-elect has identified for high-level national security positions. So I guess it sounds actually like the president-elect does have the ability to get the people checked out if he wants them to be checked. But what if he never formally identifies or submits his picks to the Department of Justice and the FBI? In his last administration, Trump overrode security adjudicators who denied clearances for his son-in-law Jared Kushner and many others after FBI background checks resulted in national security concerns. This time he appears poised to dispense with the FBI checks and potentially with Senate confirmation process even by making recess appointments. That leaves us with two pertinent memorandums of understanding which should enable President Joe Biden and or the U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee to quickly do something to preserve national security and the Constitution's advice and consent powers conferred on our elected lawmakers. First, Biden should rely on the existing MOU between the Department of Justice and his office, as well as the Presidential Transition Act, to investigate the people Trump says he wants to put in office. The MOU sets out procedures for requesting background investigations of nominees at the request of the president. It doesn't say the president-elect. It says the president. That's you, Joe. As for the Transition Act, it reads as applying to people that the president-elect has identified for high-level positions. Well, the president-elect has already publicly identified those people, and Biden should respond. What happens if a nominee refuses to cooperate, won't provide his consent to be investigated, or won't fill out any forms? The MOU has a remedy for that. The DOJ and FBI may consider a request from the president for a name check or BI background investigation without the consent of the appointee if justified by extraordinary circumstances. I'd say with some of these nominees named by Trump and the fact that Trump may forego FBI vetting of them, we have extraordinary circumstances. The Senate Judiciary Committee has its own pertinent MOU with the counsel to the president. That document, there's some, the drummers for the parade are getting ready in the background there. That document says the committee shall have access to the FBI reports on nominees for Attorney General, FBI Director, or summaries for all other DOJ nominees and non-judicial nominees. The emphasis on all other and non-judicial. We know senators want the details of the House Ethics Committee inquiry into former Representative Matt Gaetz. I guess they're no longer interested in it, but they should be. Trump's pick for Attorney General, and who could be placed in any other position as well. An FBI background investigation would certainly include a request to review that report, as well as a DOJ criminal investigation, now closed into Gaetz. The Senate Judiciary Committee should make a bipartisan request for an FBI background check of Trump's picks now. Regardless of party affiliation, if senators relinquish their advice and consent authority or confirm a nominee without benefit of knowing what risk they pose, they set a precedent for never again exercising their constitutional powers. Now, you'd be right to ask, what's the point? After all, Trump is unlikely to read, let alone act upon any derogatory information developed in FBI reports. The point would be, of course, to force Trump's hand, drop the reports on his desk, let him go forward with nominees who potentially are either found through investigation to be unqualified, at risk of compromise, or even a national security threat. Let Trump order White House security clearance adjudicators or his hand-picked agency heads to grant security clearances to seemingly unqualified candidates. Let the Senate affirm nominees after they've read details about the kind of people who may lead the DOJ or serve as the Director of National Intelligence. Don't take it from me. Here's what Founding Father Alexander Hamilton said about the Senate's advice and consent role and the need for checks and balances against the president's nominees. The president would be, quote, ashamed and afraid to bring forward unmeritorious candidates whose only qualifications would be hailing from particular states or being personally allied to the president or possessing the necessary insignificance and pliancy to render them obsequious instruments of his pleasure. Biden should be neither ashamed nor afraid to thoroughly investigate Trump's picks, given the signs that Trump may not. Though through executive order, he should mandate that the FBI conduct investigations into the backgrounds of Trump's picks and instruct the FBI to begin that process now. The U.S. Senate should use its power to request the same of the FBI. The clock is ticking. Well, that's an idea, something I hadn't thought of before. Certainly could be an alternative to sitting around waiting and watching him not do any background checks. All right, let me see if I can. You know what I'm going to do here? This would be a great time, perhaps, to bring in our pal Rosalyn MacGregor, who has a pre-recorded segment and an update from what's going on in Michigan with respect to another serious looting situation, school vouchers. And let's see if we can't get this segment in, and that'll give me a chance to try and help out with what needs to get done to make this turkey go. So you're saving dinner for us here, Rosalyn. Let you take it away. I'll be right back.
Good morning, David. Like many listeners, I've been in mourning and recovering from the shock of the election. Today's installment is a piece from the Michigan Advance that explains a portion of the history of how we got where we are today. Journalist John King brought us a book report in September. He wrote, "The effort to get school vouchers approved nationwide has a long and varied history, but a book released this month posits that it is essentially a Christian nationalist attempt at undermining public education as we know it. That's the conclusion of The Privateers, How Billionaires Created a Culture War and Sold School Vouchers by Josh Cowan, a professor of education policy at Michigan State University. Cowan, whose career as an educational researcher in the early 2000s began with the expectation that vouchers, which allow public tax dollars for education to be spent for private school tuition, would ultimately benefit students. However, the reality that Cowan documents in the book turned out to be almost exactly the opposite. Starting in the immediate aftermath of the U.S. Supreme Court's 1954 Brown v. Board of Education decision, which ordered an end to segregated public education and ending with the rise of the conservative Moms for Liberty, a vocal opponent for LGBTQ rights, and Project 2025, an authoritarian blueprint offering detailed plans to broadly enhance executive authority during a second Trump term, Cowan describes the arc of the voucher movement as never being far removed from bigotry and intolerance, whether it be against blacks or the LGBTQ community. More importantly, however, Cowan describes in detail the academic framework, whether through universities or conservative-funded think tanks, that provides intellectual cover for the movement. Chief among them was Nobel Prize-winning economist Milton Friedman, considered by many to have launched the modern school choice movement with his 1955 essay, The Role of Government in Education. Cowan writes that in the aftermath of the Brown decision, Friedman spoke at Southern conferences paid for by conservative donors, where his lecture notes affirmed his published work by arguing that the appropriate solution to tensions rising from integration mandates was a privately operated school system with parent choice of schools. Cowan says, quote, "There's this intellectual political history debate about whether Friedman himself was a segregationist, and I sort of alluded to it in the book. It's not really all that important. What is important is that segregation quickly latched on to the Friedman idea." He would go on to win a Nobel Prize 20 years later, worked for President Reagan, and advised Pinochet in Chile. But you fast forward to Milwaukee in 1990 when the first real modern voucher system gets off the ground. Wisconsin's original evaluation just didn't show the overwhelmingly positive results everyone expected, which is, I think, why in some sense the conservative voucher advocates got involved in this so heavily and aggressively. Most of us, I think, are very well aware of Betsy DeVos and the DeVos family influence in Michigan, but it's really hard to overstate how influential the DeVosses have been in national conservative Republican politics for decades. It's the Heritage Foundation. It's focused on the Family Research Council. There's a DeVos Center for Religion and Family Life at Heritage. A number of the Project 2025 authors have their roots back in some of these big DeVos groups that date back not just to Betsy, but her parents, Richard and Helen. So their larger goal as a family is much more sort of recentering this vision of Christianity into American life and American public policy, and I don't think that's a statement any of that side would disagree with. When Betsy DeVos became the nominee for Education Secretary, these old comments that she'd made reemerged about seeing school choices advancing God's kingdom and lamenting the fact that public schools are kind of the community centers. She wants churches to be back in the community center. Vouchers are two of the first 3 paragraphs in the education chapter of Project 2025. They need to package that with everything else that's in the 900 pages. It's pretty fringe and extreme stuff. And I think the quiet part out loud piece of it is they're much more willing to go at public schools in general now, as opposed to not representing parents' values or captured by the teachers' union. You'd hear this from time to time, especially in anti-union 20 years ago, but it's nothing like today. And so when Betsy DeVos left office, and I quote this column of hers in the book, she wrote a piece for USA Today where she basically said, what we want to do next as we leave, and that's long term, we want a Supreme Court case that's going to throw out all the remaining Blaine amendments and get mandatory vouchers in every state. I think those of us who understand school finances, those of us who understand how public school budgets work, understand that that would imply a substantial deconstruction of public schools. But they don't say it that way. All they say is religious families should get funding for religious education. You have to leave it to experts on budgets and experts on public education to say, wait a minute, states can't afford to stand up two different sectors of education. So if we're going to have mandatory vouchers in every state as a fundamental religious freedom exercise, then you really are talking about a complete redesign of what schooling in America is. If the goal here is really to divert lots and lots of money to Christian schools, you can put as much money in a general fund budget as you want for vouchers, but if your kid doesn't have anywhere to spend it, they've understood this to be a design problem for a while. And so the answer is, let's try to fund private schools directly. Unquote. That's a quick summary of Christian nationalist shenanigans for the last 70 years. Back to you, David.
Oh, that's it? Just the last 70 years? Okay, thanks, Rosalyn. Definitely something else to keep an eye on. So we got crypto on our list to watch, the ceding of the Senate's power over various nominees to serve in high levels in the government, and the privatization of our public education system and the looting of it by Christian nationalists. Hooray! Those are all things to keep an eye on. All right, so some additional noise in the background here is we have the fans going because, the oven's running and there's a gigantic turkey in there, and apparently this turkey is so big that it overhangs the pan, and so things are dripping off the turkey that are supposed to be dripping off the turkey, but they're dripping off the turkey and instead of into the pan, onto the bottom of the oven. And so, fingers crossed that we make it through the show without the fire alarms going off. I guess at that point, if that were to happen, we'll just call a quick end to it and see if we can get away with relying on Justice Putnam to fill in the dead air. All right, plenty more in terms of direction and stories that we can get to after our top of the hour break. We can note for the record, and then read a little bit more about it afterwards, that Trump has finally apparently signed the transition agreement. We mentioned the other day that he has so far been refusing to sign the paperwork that allows a presidential transition period to officially begin and for the existing government to start sharing information with the incoming government. For some reason, he has been avoiding doing that. He apparently has signed something, but the Washington Post reports, at least in the headline, that the transition he's agreed to sign finally lacks key guardrails. That sounds like exactly what you wanted in such an agreement. Key guardrails. Let's find out more about this after the break. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's dive in to a couple of these stories, beginning with the Washington Post piece that I teased just before we went out for the break. Trump signs transition agreement with Biden, but it lacks key guardrails. Oh, that's we need a sad trombone for that one. Can't believe the key guardrails aren't there. The Trump team is still refusing to accept several typical trappings of the presidential transition process, including federal funding, equipment, office space, or security. Very interesting. Lisa Rein, R-E-I-N, and Isaac Arnsdorf reported this piece just 2 days ago. The Trump transition team said Tuesday it had reached an agreement with the Biden White House to start coordinating on the handoff of federal agencies to the new administration, but the Trump team is still refusing to accept several typical trappings of the presidential transition process, including federal funding, equipment, and office space. Why wouldn't they want federal funding? I don't know. As well as official government background and security checks for his transition staff. The agreement does not include an ethics pledge for the president-elect required by the Presidential Transition Act, stating that Trump will avoid conflicts of interest while in office. And that was the thing we were actually waiting for to be signed, the ethics agreement. And so he just said, I'll sign some of the other stuff, but take out the ethics agreement. Like, that should be a pretty giant red flag, even though he just totally violated it last time. I don't really know why he doesn't just sign the thing and then say, to hell with you. Anyway,
The ethics plan, or an ethics plan, covering the transition staff was signed by the Trump team and posted on the website of the General Services Administration, which coordinates the handover of all the hundreds of agencies that have to be handed over. The agreement clears the way for Trump-appointed landing teams to start entering government offices and receiving briefings from career staff about the operations of hundreds of federal agencies, a ritual of presidential transitions. By turning down the $7 million in federal funding for the transition, Trump will be able to raise unlimited private donations for his transition, just as we were saying earlier in the show. The long delay in signing the transition deal, which was signed by Vice President Kamala Harris before the election in September, does not mean that Trump's transition will now conform to those of his predecessors. The president-elect refused to abide by key requirements aimed at transparency and security. The limited agreement also reflects a deep distrust the president-elect holds toward the federal government for stymieing his first-term agenda, or in some cases bolstering legal cases against him. Trump and his political allies pledged during the campaign to radically downsize and restructure the federal workforce of 2.2 million. Trump's transition team has not signed a memorandum of understanding with the Justice Department, for instance, that would allow the agency to conduct background checks and intensive reviews for the security clearances that many of Trump's landing teams need for the Biden administration to legally share classified intelligence and national defense briefings. The briefings will be given only to Trump transition officials who have proper security clearance and have signed a non-disclosure agreement, according to the White House. But, of course, what would be the point of briefing them on behalf of the rest of the incoming Trump administration if they didn't intend to break those NDAs? Some ethics guardrails were put in place with the White House. Transition officials are prohibited, for instance, from using information they learn in their new roles for their personal benefit. Yeah, right. But the plan does not include language about the president-elect's own ethical conduct during the transition, a new provision of the Presidential Transition Act added by Congress after ethical issues dogged the first Trump administration. So they saw it, they legislated against it, and he's just refusing to comply with the legislation that they passed as a result. That language represents an early step in showing how a president-elect would avoid conflicts of interest once he's in office, said Valerie Smith Boyd, director for the Center for Presidential Transition, a resource for presidential candidates within the nonpartisan Partnership for Public Service. She said that after months of talks between the Trump transition and Biden White House to reach some deal that would allow Trump officials to enter federal agencies, it may be the nature of the negotiation that a compromise needed to be made. Saloni Sharma, a White House spokeswoman, said in a statement after the agreement was announced that the Biden administration was determined to facilitate a smooth transition of power to Trump. Mixed feelings, of course, I think, a lot of people about that. A smooth transition is critical to the safety and security of the American people who are counting on their leaders to be responsible and prepared. Oh, well, Sharma said. That is why since September, the White House and the GSA have repeatedly made the case to the Trump transition team to sign both the GSA and White House memoranda of understanding, as both parties have done during previous transitions. The Trump transition team did not respond to a request for comment on why the president-elect did not sign an ethics agreement addressing any of his own potential conflicts of interest. But come on, I think we can all answer that one. The team said it chose to forego federal funding in part to save taxpayer money. No, so they could do it privately, which is consistent with President Trump's commitment to save taxpayers' hard-earned money. Accepting the money would have put a $5,000 cap on individual donations to the transition and require public disclosure of donors. The Trump team said it would not accept foreign donations and would disclose its donors without specifying when or how. But it can raise unlimited contributions because it will be funded privately. Hooray! What a wonderful thing. In 2016, Trump transition officials agreed to accept the full suite of government funding and office space. At the time, Congress provided $6 million for the transition, plus $1 million to help prepare new appointees. But this time around, Trump's team rejected the GSA's offer out of long-standing skepticism of the outgoing administration
and the federal bureaucracy, particularly the FBI, which traditionally conducts background checks that are used by the government to weigh security clearances. The Biden White House said it disagreed with that position, but wanted to proceed with a smooth transition. I don't see how that's possible, but okay. The D.C.-based law firm of a Trump law campaign lawyer has vetted some of those the president-elect has announced he'll nominate for his cabinet, as the Washington Post has reported. As part of that deal, the Trump team submitted an ethics code similar to one it used before the president-elect's first term 8 years ago, when they were great on ethics. The code disqualifies registered lobbyists from serving in the transition and said officials should recuse themselves from matters they lobbied on in the past year. It also prohibits transition members from lobbying on issues they handled for 6 months after the transition. In the meantime, without official background checks or security clearance investigations, the incoming administration's unorthodox approach has alarmed critics. This announcement fails to answer key questions about national security threats and FBI vetting of nominees and increases concerns about corruption, Senator Elizabeth Warren said in a statement after the agreement was announced. There appear to be serious gaps between the Trump transition's ethics agreement and the letter of the law. Warren called Trump's reliance on private donors to fund the transition nothing more than a ploy for the well-connected Trump insiders to line their pockets while pretending to save the taxpayers' money. Yeah, that's actually correct. Senator, good job. You've hit the nail on the head. All right. Meanwhile, outside of the transition, but inside a courtroom, might be interested to learn, as the New York Times reports, thanks to Stefanos Chen and Olivia Ben-Simon, unless she's Ben-Simon, but it looks like Ben-Simon, but jammed together with no extra capitals. Rudy Giuliani loses his lawyers and his cool in court. I would have put that in opposite order. But the subject of several cases, the former New York City mayor lashed out at a judge questioning why he had not forfeited personal assets as required. As you know, he lost a gigantic lawsuit to Shay Moss and is it Freeman? Oh, I don't know. Now the name slips my mind, but I'm sure they are properly acknowledged in the body of this article. But let's see what's going on in Rudy's mental meltdown. Rudolph Giuliani was not having a good day, and it showed. Of course, it was Rudolph W. Giuliani. The former New York City mayor was in federal court in Manhattan, not as a prosecutor, but as a defendant, on Tuesday to discuss his continuing failure to give up nearly $11 million worth of personal assets. The forfeiture was meant to be a down payment on the $148 million that Giuliani owes to two Georgia election workers for defaming them by claiming, without evidence, that they had helped steal the 2020 presidential election. But first, Judge Louis Lyman allowed Mr. Giuliani's lawyers to withdraw from the case. They had requested to be removed 2 weeks ago, citing an unspecified, quote, professional ethics concern. Wow. I'm sorry it came to this, Kenneth Caruso, one of Giuliani's lawyers, said before he and his co-counsel left the hearing. In a statement on Tuesday, Mr. Caruso said that there had been, quote, a difference of opinion with Mr. Giuliani, but they wished his new counsel, quote, every success. Yeah, they had to get out of there because they knew he was hiding assets, and they had to resign from the case. And now they'll bring in a new lawyer who either doesn't have those ethics or will represent him for the next couple of weeks and then realize that he too has an ethical obligation to resign from the case and replace him with somebody else, but all of whom will continue to keep the confidence of or keep confidential, I guess I should say, what Giuliani has revealed to them. There's still that attorney-client privilege, unless you get a judge to say, no, this is a crime-fraud exception, and you have to speak. So, while we laud these lawyers for saying, yeah, you can't ethically continue with this, it also becomes something of a mechanism to help him continue to hide his fraud. The focus then shifted to Mr. Giuliani's new lawyer, Joseph M. Camerata, a former police officer.
The men forged a relationship after the September 11th terrorist attacks, when Mr. Camarada's brother, a firefighter, was killed. And surprisingly, he didn't blame Giuliani for that, even though everybody else did. Mr. Camarada, who has been involved in the case for just over a week, asked that Mr. Giuliani's trial, which is scheduled for January 16th, be delayed to determine whether the former mayor could keep his condominium in Florida and several custom-made Yankees World Series rings. Mr. Camarada said the delay was necessary because he also had to prepare for a December court appearance in Washington, where Giuliani could be found in contempt of court for continuing to make false accusations about the two Georgia poll workers, Ruby Freeman, yes, and her daughter Shay Moss. Also, Mr. Camarada said Mr. Giuliani would like to attend President-elect Donald Trump's inauguration on January 20th, and a trial could prevent that. Well, the answer, Judge Lyman said, was no. The hour-long hearing, punctuated by an angry outburst by Mr. Giuliani, was the most contentious yet in the winding search for his personal assets, which he was ordered to hand over to the two women more than a month ago. For the first time in weeks, the strain of several cases stemming from Giuliani's time as Trump's personal lawyer appeared to be getting to him as he sat slumped back in his chair with his arms crossed. After missing several deadlines to surrender the bulk of his assets, Giuliani has turned over only a fraction of notable items, including some pieces from his luxury watch collection and a 1980 Mercedes-Benz convertible that he says once belonged to the actress Lauren Bacall. But Giuliani still has not provided the keys or the title to the vehicle. Here's the car, good luck, right? He's doing it out of spite. The former mayor has begun the transfer of his most valuable asset, a 10-room apartment in Manhattan's Upper East Side that has been listed for sale at more than $6 million. The process has been delayed because the property remains jointly held with his ex-wife, Judith Giuliani. The scant items that have been surrendered are problematic, according to Judge Lyman. The car without the keys and title is meaningless, he said, cutting off Mr. Camarada mid-sentence. Your client is a competent person, the judge added, noting that Giuliani was a former U.S. attorney. He was, however, recently disbarred in New York and Washington, D.C. Giuliani objected. I've applied for the title, he said, of the Mercedes. I haven't gotten it yet. What am I supposed to do? Make it up myself like I did with electoral votes? Yeah, right. What do you mean you applied for the title? It's your car. Where's the effing title? I don't have a car, he said in a raised voice. I don't have a credit card. I don't have cash. He complained that he didn't have a penny that was not tied up by Ms. Freeman and Ms. Moss. Well, that's your doing, dude. Judge Lyman warned Mr. Giuliani to let his new lawyer speak for him. Somebody has to tell the truth, Mr. Giuliani shot back. Next time, he's not going to be permitted to speak, Judge Lyman told Mr. Camarada, and the court will have to take action. The women's lawyers described their frustration in trying to recover Giuliani's property, much of which is in a storage facility in Ronkonkoma, New York, on Long Island. Aaron Nathan, one of the women's lawyers, said Mr. Giuliani's compliance has been lackadaisical at best and intentionally obstructive at worst. Last week, the women's lawyer said that more than 20 pallets of moving boxes belonging to Giuliani were still at the storage facility. America First Warehouse. And do you think that means something? Yes, it does, because the owners, apparently, were making it difficult to search the contents. A facility representative who calls himself Joe the Box on social media, for whatever reason, posted a defiant video on Twitter in which he expressed support for Giuliani and said he would not stand for someone to, quote, dissect the former mayor's life. Like, what right do you have to say anything about this? Get the hell out of here. And in fact, last Friday, Judge Lyman ordered Giuliani to account for all the property at the facility that was subject to seizure and to deliver it to a warehouse of the women's choosing by December 13th. Maybe we should count down to that. If Mr. Giuliani continues to miss deadlines in the case, he could face steep penalties, including jail time. Dun, 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 dun. There could be similar consequences in Washington, where a judge will decide in December if the former mayor has violated an order not to defame the women by accusing them again of election fraud on recent media appearances. As he left the courthouse, Giuliani repeated his grievances at a prepared microphone stand about being targeted for political ends. A heckler shouted at Mr. Giuliani as he walked to a waiting car. "You got nothing now," the man said. "You're a bum." I like it. Mr. Giuliani smiled and turned toward the man. "I wouldn't bet against me," he said. Although it seems for all the world like he's being totally abandoned by Trump world at this point. And, hey, I hope that's true. All right, let's see. Other things to bring to your attention on this fine Thanksgiving Day. How about this one? File this one under Every Republican Accusation is a Confession. The Guardian. Martin Pengelly, who I should check on the pronunciation of his name once and for all. Pengelly, reports a U.S. drone firm, drones, has appointed Donald Trump Jr. as an advisor and a member of their board. And guess what? They have seen their stock price soar. Unusual Machines is the name of this company, which is unusual all by itself. And they say that the president's eldest son has a wealth of experience as a globally recognized business leader. And that's why they did it. A little-known Florida-based drones company said, Florida-based, of course, yes, on Wednesday that it had appointed Donald Trump Jr. as an advisor and then saw its stock price surge. Why? Because I'm sure as an advisor he got stock, or at least stock options, and then therefore buying the stock of this company becomes a legalish way of bribing the Trump family directly. So that, they knew what was going to happen. It's good for their stock price. Doesn't hurt. Give it a try. But, of course, isn't that exactly what everything they accused Hunter Biden of being involved in? Yes, of course it is. Oh, well. Don Jr., joining our board of advisors, provides us unique expertise that we need as we bring drone component manufacturing back to America, said Alan Evans, chief executive of Unusual Machines. By mid-morning on the New York Stock Exchange, company shares had climbed as high as $11.67, more than double the day's opening price. Unusual Machines also said Trump Jr., the oldest son of the president-elect, was among its investors. What do you know? A filing with the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission listed Trump Jr. as the second biggest shareholder, as a matter of fact. In a press release that described Trump Jr. as a globally recognized business leader and a best-selling author, thanks to the Republican Party buying 30,000 copies of his book, Evans said he would bring a wealth of experience, I guess, in cocaine and hunting. Trump, typically referred to as Don Jr., has spent most of his adult life working for his father's company, the Trump Organization, on real estate and branding, but he has risen to political prominence since his sister Ivanka and her husband Jared Kushner distanced themselves from Donald Trump following his defeat by Joe Biden in the 2020 presidential election, an incitement to the January 6th attack on Congress by Trump supporters who tried in vain to overturn his loss. This year, Trump Jr. was widely held to have helped steer the Ohio Senator J.D. Vance onto the Republican ticket, which defeated the Democratic ticket, unfortunately, as you know. On Wednesday, Trump Jr. said, "The need for drones is obvious. It is also obvious that we must stop buying Chinese drones and Chinese drone parts. I love what Unusual Machines is doing and to bring drone manufacturing jobs back to the USA." That was in line with statements from his father, the president-elect, who had long said that he will impose hefty tariffs on Chinese imports. Unusual Machines, however, says in its SEC filing that it, quote, has been heavily dependent on Chinese imports for our products and operations. Referring to brands of drones and equipment, it said a substantial majority of Rotor Riot's products are manufactured directly and indirectly using Chinese vendors. Fat Shark's primary contract manufacturer is Shenzhen Fat Shark Technology Limited, which is located in Shenzhen, China. Unusual Machines did not immediately comment further. So whatever, trade with China, drones, payoffs, etc., to presidential sons, every Republican accusation, of course, once again proven to be a confession. All right, let's move on to the next subject. Whoops, I got to make a note for myself about what's happening along the way. What can we fit in between now and the next break? Oh, I don't know. Let's see. I put aside a couple of blue sky posts from the last couple of days that I wanted to share with you. One, this quick observation by Patrick Fitzgerald, not the, was it Patrick Fitzgerald who we were all watching during the George W. Bush administration doing the Scooter Libby prosecution, etc.? Yeah. Anyway, not that Patrick Fitzgerald, I don't think. Rather a writer of funny song lyrics and parody songs, as he identifies himself in his bio there. But he was just doubling up on a point made by Aaron Rupar. Aaron Rupar picking up the story and reporting on the movement of Russ vote into the administration, noting Trump spent the campaign pretending that the deeply unpopular Project 2025 agenda was not the blueprint for his second term. So it's pretty rich now for Republicans to claim that a vote for Trump was a vote for him to implement Project 2025 policies. You see what's going on here? Patrick puts a finer point on it, saying, yeah, Trump has a mandate, apparently, to do all the stuff that he said he was not associated with. That would be an odd mandate to try to claim. I don't have anything to do with Project 2025. I don't know what it is. The people who wrote it, I don't know them. I don't work with them. And now that he's hiring them and saying, yes, your job is to implement Project 2025, that thing I got the mandate for by winning a squeaker of an election, promising everybody that I had nothing to do with this Project 2025. That is a little odd, don't you think? So a good point. Glad they brought it up. The other, I put aside my own post on Blue Sky, having seen, we haven't discussed this because, of course, it's happening in France, and then, therefore, mostly in French. And you know how I feel about trying to purposefully do a whole report full of foreign language pronunciation. But in fact, I had been mostly unaware of this case, as a matter of fact, even well past the point at which it became a worldwide sensation. The trial of Dominique Pellicot, is that right? Pelicot, for his abuse of his wife, Giselle, over many, many years. Apparently, a huge, huge case. And somehow it had managed to escape my notice until a couple of weeks ago. And then afterwards, I just wasn't following the trial or anything. But if you haven't seen this story, you should. It's incredible, and it's a worldwide sensation, but it's captured the imagination of just everybody in France. And I guess the long story short of it here is this guy, Dominique Pellicot, is an outrageous psychopathic abuser of his wife. But he was otherwise living what looked like a normal family life, wife, kids, etc. And in fact, Giselle Pellicot was fairly convinced that she was in a happy and normal marriage and family situation, when in fact, Dominique Pellicot, the only problem she professed having was these memory lapses that were bothering her, and, some physical manifestations of what she thought was some sort of brain issue. So she went to see a doctor to see, do I have a brain tumor? And instead, by happenstance, they pick up Dominique Pellicot on some other criminal violation and are searching his phone, and they find out that for years he's been drugging Giselle, knocking her out, and then while she's unconscious, inviting up at this point 50 plus other men into the house to sexually abuse and rape her while she's unconscious, and filming it. And he's got kids, he's got a family, and nobody's noticing this. It's the most incredible story you ever heard, except that it's true and tragic. It's incredible, but it's actually happening. Well, this trial is winding down. And the thing that has made it such a cultural phenomenon here is that Giselle Pellicot has been basically so forthright and outspoken in all of this, now that she knows what's going on, and not only prosecuting her husband, but saying, yeah, and I'm going to speak out about all this, and I want these films shown to the jury. I know it's supposed to be, I'm so embarrassed by all this. But no, the shame belongs on the defendant here. The shame belongs on the other side, and it's been this big cultural movement among French, among everybody in France who's right-thinking, anyway, that, we should be reversing. There's no shame in having been a victim here. The shame belongs with the other guys. Force it back onto them and make everybody recognize this is sex trafficking. This is rape. You can't do this. His kids are, on her side and just want him out of their life and for him to be sentenced, et cetera, et cetera. It's really rather amazing. And this Yahoo News article that I grabbed about it really sums a lot of it up, and you should be taking a look at it, right? But the headline, quickly, 51 men were charged with raping her. Giselle Pellicot gives closing statements in shocking French trial. The whole thing, the reason I picked it up, not only because it's an amazing story in its own right, but is to remind you, Pete Hegseth thinks none of what went on there is rape. Remember when we found out about what was written in the student newspaper under this right-wing student newspaper at Princeton University under his editorship and under his editorial guidance, that women who were unconscious when they were raped hadn't in fact experienced rape because there was this missing element of duress somehow. And so, of course, he also believes he's not guilty of rape in the 2017 sexual assault at the Republican Women's Conference, which I guess he packed roofies for in preparation. Is that the guy you want heading the Pentagon? No, of course not. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, that are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. So, you should absolutely read, if you haven't caught up with this story, what's going on here. It's incredible, and it's a total reframing of rape culture and the patriarchy, etc. Well worth your time about what's going on in France. I just really wanted to connect it to American politics by pointing out that Pete Hegseth is a dangerous guy for many reasons, not the least of which is that he would take a case like this that is fundamentally redefining what the approach to sexual violence in France and other places around the world, as we realize how insane things have been this whole time. And Hegseth, of course, fighting for the status quo there. Need more sex traffickers, need more people rendering women unconscious and sexually abusing them and pretending that it's not rape. Well, no. Meanwhile, I had a piece parked here from a couple of days ago from Rolling Stone, Ryan Bort, Aswin Subsang teaming up for this November 22nd piece, in which it is said here that Team Trump is furious that Hegseth hid somehow his sex assault claim. This is the effing Pentagon, they say here. The president-elect is putting Republican senators to the test with a string of controversial administration picks. But what in particular is up with, just to put a more formal spin on things, with Hegseth and their idea that he somehow hid this from them, even though we've read things that have suggested that it has been known to them. Matt Gaetz, of course, may have withdrawn his name from consideration to become Donald Trump's attorney general over sexual misconduct accusations, but alleged sexual abuser Pete Hegseth is still fighting to persuade Republican senators to confirm him to one of the most powerful positions in government. Hegseth was already facing an uphill confirmation battle to become Secretary of Defense, given that he's best known as a Fox News host with no government experience. The emergence of a disturbing sexual assault accusation against him from 2017 isn't helping matters, and Trump's team is pissed. It's hard to believe, but they say they are. According to 4 sources familiar with the situation, some top Trump transition officials and others close to the president-elect have been puzzled, if not infuriated, that Hegseth did not preemptively inform them of these allegations against him before they made their way to the press. Most notably through the publication of a police report detailing an alleged incident at the hotel in Monterey, California. How did he not know? Why didn't he tell us? A source close to Trump says, Pete wasn't interviewing for a job at McDonald's. This is the effing Pentagon. Even if the allegations are false, it doesn't matter because he was supposed to tell us what we needed to know so we could be better prepared to defend him, not learn about it from the media. There was, the sources say, a vetting process for the Hegseth pick, but it did not uncover these details, nor was it especially invasive. Trump's transition team did not sign agreements, as you know, with the White House or the Justice Department to allow the FBI to conduct background checks on the president-elect's nominees. And by the way, we should note along the way this could be a ruse. They may very well have known about it, but were hoping that it wouldn't come up again, or that it would, and that they could force their way past it and show, aha, we can even force the United States Senate to accept someone like this. Therefore, we are very strongly strong. And if you need to evade questions, if you got yourself caught in a hallway here and an angry reporter is screaming at you about it, you just say, I didn't know. And it's his fault, and how dare he? Well, anyway, when we ask, is there anything else we need to know about, that is usually a good time to mention a police report, a Trump advisor says. Obviously, he remembered that all this happened, and there's no way, I don't think, that he could have believed that this wouldn't come out once he got nominated. No, probably not. And he was probably astonished that you wanted to try to do this. But he figured, let's do it. I mean, it's a fun project. If I get it, great. If I don't, well, it was a good time trolling. Stephen Chung, the Trump campaign's communications director, said in a statement that Pete Hegseth is a great guy somehow. So if you want to listen to him do that, you can read the statement here. Mediaite has also reported on the Trump team's anger with Hegseth for not divulging more about the allegation before Trump announced the pick, with one source noting he told the campaign there's no issues. That would be interesting if he actually said that. Hegseth went to Capitol Hill on Thursday to reassure senators that despite the allegation, he should be placed in charge of the world's most powerful military. Republican lawmakers gave mixed reactions when speaking with the media about Hegseth's candidacy, with some brushing off the police report, which was made public last Wednesday, as nothing more than allegations. And some, like Senator Kevin Cramer, just a reminder, there is a senator named Kevin Cramer, he's from South Dakota, noting that it was a pretty big problem, given that we have a sexual assault problem in our military, per NBC News. So Kevin Cramer, paying some attention. The matter was fully investigated, and I was completely cleared, and that's where I'm going to leave it, Hegseth told reporters after his day in Congress. So, wow, Hegseth was apparently accompanied by Vice President-elect J.D. Vance, currently a senator himself. Vance also accompanied Gates as he met with senators on Tuesday, a day before the congressman turned cameo star withdrew his name from contention to become Attorney General. So, wow. There is a little bit of a little something for you on Thanksgiving Day as well. Let's see. What else might we discuss and get a relatively full and well-rounded discussion in on? Oh, that one looks too long. Let's see. You know what? This is long too, but let's do it anyway. Because Matt Glassman has moved over to Blue Sky, but in this case, writing over at Substack, you know who he is, and if you don't, I forget, so I can't tell you. Now, he's a professor, or senior fellow, whatever that means, at Georgetown, and a big process guy himself, one of the people included in, a relatively small circle of people who actually think it's fun to talk about congressional procedure, and he does a great job with it. And here, a piece entitled Energy in the Executive, ? Trump is picking up and falling down right where he left off. And, of course, that harkens back a little bit to the opening of the show about Trump having picked up right where George W. Bush left off. And then going completely bonkers. But here's what he's got to say. He's got like a big, 15-point list here, far-ranging and interesting. and detailed because it's Matt Glassman. First up, and I guess I don't know whether there's any particular order to it. Number one here, the nomination is dead. And I don't know here whether he means the Gates nomination, which was dead, or the concept of nominations, because I think they're dead too. The nomination is dead. The scheme to adjourn the Senate against its will is dead, and Donald Trump's honeymoon magic on the Hill is dead. That's the basic balance sheet of Trump's miscalculation in nominating Matt Gaetz for Attorney General. Perhaps the only real surprise is that they pulled the plug as fast as they did. I think everyone would agree with that. Number two here is, if there's one thing members of Congress don't like, it's being blindsided, which will apply to Hegseth as well. And the Gaetz nomination definitely blindsided them. Senators like to be consulted ahead of time about nominations. When stuff just happens without warning, like via Twitter or Truth Social, it forecloses the option to deal with it in private. You can't influence the decisions, and you can't kill bad decisions. This is a very important behind-the-scenes dynamic about this stuff. You know, why it explains an awful lot about the way Trump works and the reason he causes so much trouble for himself, right? Well, in his simplistic, childlike understanding of the presidency, the president just declares who he wants, and everybody else snaps to attention. And that's because the parts of the process that you see if you're not paying any particular attention and just reading newspaper accounts, if that, is the president nominates somebody, the senators say, yeah, he seems like a pretty good guy, a process happens, then they approve them. But of course, there's a lot that goes into that behind the scenes, including one, consulting with them ahead of time, two, checking out, is there going to be consensus for getting this person confirmed ahead of time? And three, most often there is at least an expected consensus coming because you're not nominating complete idiots and incompetents and wild off the chain criminals for top jobs in law enforcement or anywhere else for that matter. You're starting with a pool of applicants that are much more broadly acceptable, and you're speaking ahead of time behind the scenes with the people whose advice and consent you need, but it's informal. And so Trump doesn't read about that. He doesn't see or hear anything about that. As far as he knows, the president says this is the person, the Senate says okay, and that's the way it works. He's missed all the nuance. Now, he's got Glassman quotes here from something he wrote last week or the previous week about the nominations process. In a normal process, nominations fail during the executive vetting because senators are looped into the White House and transition discussions, and they veto people at that stage before they're ever nominated. If unacceptable candidates do get nominated, they're usually buried through non-action or defeated in committee to reduce the party tension and embarrassment and or leave fewer fingerprints. But Trump, of course, explodes all of that by, one, nominating someone without consulting anybody, and two, demanding that they approve him anyway, and then three, starting to threaten that if you don't approve him anyway, I will primary you, I'll prorogue the Congress, I'll make a recess appointment, all the things that are just not done. And yet he thinks he's entitled to do. And I mean, those powers existed, and they underlay other threats that you could make more gently along the way, but you don't go nuclear on everything all at once. He just doesn't understand that. Make no mistake, he continues, the Senate GOP is glad Gaetz is gone. He's unqualified, he's an ethics nightmare, he's not at all serious about governance, and everyone personally hates him because he's an asshole. I mean, yeah, it's right there. He's right, direct and to the point. But I'm sure more than a few senators are good and pissed at Trump about how this went down, since it could have been a big nothing burger if the president-elect had just floated the idea and tried to socialize it on the Hill before announcing anything. Yeah, a great point. Just good nuance here. One of Trump's underrated political weaknesses is blindsiding allies. He doesn't seem to think long term about how destructive it is on political relationships to have people stick their necks out to back you, only to see you turn around and undercut you. Wow. True. And this is point number 3, by the way. He celebrated a House tax bill in May of 2017 in the Rose Garden, then turned around and described it as mean a month later. He called GOP members cowards for not supporting higher age limits for guns in February of 2018. February. By March, he had reversed course and was himself against it. He flip-flopped on TikTok, like the whole concept of whether it should be allowed, right? Backing and then scuttling a GOP bill to regulate it. He bailed on the GOP Senate immigration compromise, although that was supposedly a designed play, and 100 other examples. Point 4, none of all this is all that surprising. It's always been a myth that Trump has dominated the Senate on nominations. Interesting point here. He withdrew 4 cabinet-level nominations in his first term. A slew of lower-level appointments were sunk, including what? Wasn't there like a judicial appointment for a guy who was like a professional ghost hunter or something like that? A paranormalist? All right. Anyway, I forgot about that guy. But a number of judicial nominees were voted down in committee. He smartly gave White House jobs to people like Bannon and Miller who were unconfirmable. His perfect record on the floor was always nonsense. Failures on the floor are just extremely rare because you try to avoid even having them with the rest of this process. Trump had more flubs than previous presidents, largely because he nominated bad candidates and probably didn't take enough Senate advice prior to the nominations. Whatever your breathless, crazy liberal relatives might say, I don't know what that's supposed to mean, but the United States Senate is rarely going to play presidential lapdog in the face of a truly embarrassing nomination. I see. So if you're worried that people will lie down for these nominations like Gates or Hegseth, you're supposed to believe that the United States Senate is rarely, if ever, going to just do that. Of course, rarely, if ever, do they just say, we'll murder you in your sleep if you don't go along, and then show them a videotape of themselves sleeping taken through their window through a rifle scope. Like, that'll change minds, but it is rare. Number 5, even less surprising is that the Senate decided that it was going to skip the recess appointment schemes and keep its confirmation power. No one loves analyzing this sort of stuff and doing some Congress LARPing more than me, but Trump does a lot more pushing on the edge cases of the Constitution than actually crashing through the walls. And it is sometimes difficult to tell whether he means the threat he's leveling or whether he means to make a threat and back off from it, or he just wants to make a threat and then a deal is cut, like we were discussing yesterday about just coming to some sort of understanding so that they didn't have to go all the way to court and risk bad precedent, and then coming to some sort of agreement in the middle, and then Trump saying, that's what I meant the whole time anyway, whether he did or he didn't. Point number 6, I won't pretend that I know what's going to happen on the rest of the nominations, but I have some thoughts. The prediction markets for the confirmation of RFK, Gabbard, and Hegseth all fell 3 to 5% on the Gates news, which makes sense from a Bayesian point of view, because it was evidence that the Senate is not simply going to confirm any and all Trump picks. And Gates went down without any individual senator expending any political capital. And with Gates gone, media attention can turn to some of the other nominees and their scandals. But there are countervailing forces, too. A same-party Senate just isn't going to sink too many high-profile picks of their president-elect. Every time someone goes down, the others get some sort of marginal benefit. And my hunch is that the benefit increases after each failure. Furthermore, now that the Senate GOP has stood up to Trump, they don't have that hanging over them. Point 7, my guess is we get a maximum of one more high-profile withdrawal in this round. Gabbard should make it. I don't know whether he should make it through or should be the one that is the withdrawal, or I don't know what. Maybe Hegseth fails if the ethics scandal sticks or gets worse. Maybe RFK becomes seen as just too left-wing kooky. But I think the idea that all three of them would fail is absolutely crazy. And I think Pam Bondi will sail through in any case, but especially now that she's benefiting from some sort of she's not Gates bonus. Number 8, and for the record, Gates can't, he says, come back to the 118th House. There's no backsies on House resignations, but I'm not sure if he legally gave up his seat for the 119th. But there was an update. Gates has announced that he will not return for the 119th. I mean, I don't know if that was based on the letter, which I still think was ambiguous, or whether he's clarified since, and there's no link here. But, I mean, it makes the most sense that he'd just say, forget it, I'm done here. It would be very trolly of him to try to come back. And by the way, I didn't put aside reports on this one, but there were still a couple of outstanding congressional seats. The races had been undetermined out in California, and I guess the last one has now been done. And short-term Republican Congresswoman Michelle Steele, has been defeated. The seat has flipped. I mean, we're talking like 150 votes. And I don't even know offhand the name of the new Democratic representative-elect. I've seen it mentioned a number of times, and it just didn't stick with me. Dan something, maybe? I don't know. So it's useless to tell you that. But the point here is, one, that the seat flipped, and two, that we're now looking at, I think, a 220 to 215 House when it's all said and done. But remember also that with Gates not returning and two other members, all the names are escaping me now. Waltz from Florida, and who's that horrible, odious woman from upstate New York who is moving into the administration too. I don't know why her name escapes me all the time, but maybe because I just dislike thinking about her. Anyway, the point is there will be a couple of vacancies for a couple of months before there are special elections held for these seats. And so that takes it down to 217 215 if everybody shows up, no absences for whatever reason on those days. That is literally the most narrow majority there could possibly be. 1 seat difference between the two parties for a couple of months. And then there'll be special elections, and God only knows what happens in the special elections. Even in these very strongly Republican districts, anything can happen. But even if they win, it's really still a razor-thin margin. It's just really interesting. It'll be very exciting to see the Republicans attempt to operate with a literal 1-seat majority and, by the way, run around chugging raw milk and demanding that there be no vaccinations. I mean, you're really asking for it. So we'll see how that goes. But to get back to Matt Glassman's list of things here, Gates says he won't return for the 119th Congress. Number 9 here, the main story for me here is that Trump really isn't good at party politics. He doesn't care about it, right? Or at running a political operation. It's why the White House was a mess in his first term. It's why he had a terrible time dealing with the bureaucracy. It's why Congress ignored his first term agenda. He doesn't care at all about the GOP. I got to read it because I say GOP instead of GOP, but the GOP qua GOP. He's never in the mindset of compromise in order to win marginal policy gains, and he burns goodwill with everything he touches. He can be a wrecking ball. He often commands a lot of personal loyalty, and his chaos empowers a lot of freelancers. But he doesn't really seem to have any skill in policy making. Point 10. And that is why he's always looking for innovative shortcuts around the regular political work of building coalitions and convincing other governing actors to help you. Why else would you be floating crazy recess appointment schemes when your party controls the Senate with 53 votes and they are allegedly either very loyal or very terrified of you? Good point. Again, and why would you stock your administration with acting appointments? Where's my sound effect? My acting sound effect. Yeah. Rather than just get them confirmed. a better and smarter idea might be to work with those 53 people and sail through a cabinet full of solid nominees. But that's not Trump. He's not doing it. And here, again, it's the influence of, to some extent, J.D. Vance, who is a result of, to some extent, the influence of Don Jr., and God only knows what other bad actors are advising him to troll the entire cabinet through. It is rather amazing. This could be an easy play, but he just won't take it. Number 11, the so-called Doge thingy. The Doge update is that they are suggesting the Impoundment Control Act is unconstitutional. This is probably another case of Trump pushing on walls he never intends to break down. But this is potentially the biggest executive threat to the separation of powers of them all. Yet it is number 11 on the list here. Number 12, first, a quick explainer, I guess, of point number 11. Under the Constitution, only Congress can appropriate money, and it has to be done by law. That is to say, by legislation. And Congress can condition those appropriations by purpose, by amount, and by time. So, Congress can appropriate $1 million for 1 year for school nutrition programs. Impoundment is the idea that the president can refuse to spend that appropriated money. So if the president doesn't like the idea of $1 million for school nutrition, he could just refuse to spend it. Congress passed a law in 1974 that precludes the president from doing this. The act provides a mechanism for the president to propose rescission of funds and for him to delay the expenditure of funds, but it bars direct impoundment. And in case you don't know about rescissions, he can suggest, hey, Congress, I really don't like this. Why don't you take up a bill that says, despite the fact that we originally appropriated that $1 million for school nutrition, we've changed our minds. We rescind that appropriations. And expedited rescissions process was the compromise that they landed on when even the line item veto got defeated, right? So this was basically, you have to ask Congress and then convince them. You know, you're a political operator. Convince your party, you're in control, to rescind the appropriation. It's pretty good. And in the meantime, you're barred from direct impoundment. Now, number 13, the executive branch has leftover money all the time. Throughout American history, Congress has provided money for things, and the executive branch has found ways to do those things for cheaper. You can read all about this in Mark Pauletta's Defense of Impoundment, which is a thorough review of lots of alleged non-spending by the executive branch. But in my view, the Pauletta argument seriously misses the mark. It seems to confuse the practice of Congress allowing the executive to not spend all the money with the right of the president to choose not to spend all the money. And this, I guess, he doesn't note this because he never heard me say it, but it harkens back to those weird gray areas of acquiescence and agreement outside of setting formal precedent. Just as instead of allowing the judiciary to rule one way or the other on the power of a subpoena, if you simply agree to honor it, but you say, in my honoring it, I want you to agree that I'm not being forced to honor it, it works. It gets the job done, and it avoids setting precedent, right? Here, too, there's a big difference between Congress allowing the executive not to spend all the money and the president demanding that he has the right to block it and that you need to recognize that. Don't let the president choose not to spend all the money. No one is saying the executive branch necessarily has to spend all the money. Instead, he says, my view is that Congress can, by law, mandate that all the money be spent. You can, and they haven't, but you can. Number 14, this is an extremely important point because if the president can choose not to spend money that Congress has appropriated and directly demanded be spent, then the president can essentially cancel any program Congress sets up that requires funding.
That's an immense amount of power. And in my view, it is a violation of the Take Care Clause of the Constitution. Take care that the laws be faithfully executed. The law says, spend this money. If you don't spend it, you're not executing the law faithfully. So it seems totally illogical that the president could legally refuse to spend any money appropriated for the Department of Justice simply because he decided we shouldn't have a federal criminal code, or out of spite because Congress wouldn't go along with his reform program. Number 15, and I guess I better hurry here. I noted last week that Trump's theory of the presidency feels a lot like the 16th or 17th century England, where unlimited royal power was weakly constrained by Parliament. Impoundment fits directly into this vision. In fact, the very idea of appropriations was developed during this period of English history. Prior to the English Civil War, Parliament generally granted the king supply, which was basically lump sums of money or tax authority that the monarchy could use as it saw fit or not use. The development of limitations on how that money could be spent, time, purpose, amount, right, were the essence of the new term appropriation and a new conception of parliamentary control over government expenditures. Yeah. It's got a history, though it's time for us to cut out on that history. Impoundment largely reduces appropriation to supply. If the president has a constitutional right to impound appropriations, Congress will be left with something that looks a lot more like the supply power, a mere negative right to withhold money requested from the executive branch. The power of the purse is the last and strongest power of Congress. The ability to appropriate will be greatly diminished, and the executive will have discretion to ignore any monies it doesn't want spent, and the president will be able to leverage that reality to bargain for appropriations that Congress would not otherwise want to provide. How does Congress ever negotiate on spending if the president has a post-enactment veto over all of it? All of this is better explained, both the mechanics and the English history, by Josh Chaffetz. Follow him on Twitter and Blue Sky if you want to. The links are here. I particularly recommend his wonderful book, Congress's Constitution. And you know what? There's too many points to get through all the way here, but this is really great, nuanced stuff. It forces us to perhaps come back tomorrow and keep you company during the cleanup and the eating of all the leftover pie. Time now, though, to hand things over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. What's he got on tap for you? I don't know. Does it really make a difference in terms of whether or not you're going to listen? Because you know the juicy stuff is coming. You know what I haven't gotten to that he may yet cover, not only from around the country, but from around the world. He's always got an eye on those international markets as well.
You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
All right, do stay tuned for Justice Putnam's take on things coming up next. And, of course, he's taken a little break away from the microphone. I think he may have set these things in motion beforehand. Or perhaps I misunderstood, and he's, in fact, taking a break entirely. We won't, because we've got too much to talk about. We'll try it again tomorrow. Happy Thanksgiving.